Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to get started. We're so glad you joined us today to learn more about the connections between project-based learning and competency-based education. I'm Elliot Levine, Research Director at the Aurora Institute. Could I have the next slide, please? So if you're just joining us, we welcome you to introduce yourselves in the chat. Great to see everybody who's introduced yourselves already. And use the chat freely throughout today's session to ask questions and offer comments or resources. If you'd like to tweet about the webinar, we're at Aurora_Inst, as shown here. And we also want to let you know that we're recording the webinar, and we'll send you an email in the next day or two with a link to the webinar slides and recording. Next slide, please. We're very fortunate today to have a panel of expert presenters from schools and organizations that are doing excellent work in project-based learning and competency-based education. Building 21 is a network of deeply innovative schools and school designers, and our presenters today from Building 21 are Brianna Ala, Telsa Communal, Heather Harlan, and Iris Sanders. Lucas Education Research focuses on building evidence to support transformative practices for deep student engagement and learning. And our presenters from Lucas Education Research are Kristen DeVivo, Rochelle Urban, and Nathan Warner. And Spring Point Schools creates and supports innovative personalized school models. And our presenter today from Spring Point is Christy Kingham. Next slide, please. So our learning goals today are to understand what project-based learning and competency-based education have in common, how to implement them together, and the shifts that we need to make in classrooms, schools, and systems to put them into practice successfully. Our presenters will be sharing information related to these learning goals for the first hour, and then if you'd like to join us in breakout rooms for an additional half hour, you'll have the opportunity to talk with the presenters, ask them questions, and dig deeper into some of today's topics. I want to mention that today's webinar is really part 2 on this topic, and that Lucas Education Research and the Aurora Institute presented another webinar last May on project-based learning that we'll put a link to in the chat. And next slide, please. And now I would like to welcome Kristen DeVivo, the Executive Director of Lucas Education Research. And Kristen, thanks very much for joining us today.
Hi, Elliot. Thanks for having me today. We are so appreciative of this opportunity to share the work of Lucas Education Research at the George Lucas Educational Foundation. And I want to start by just sharing more broadly our vision, which is that we believe that authentic, challenging, active, and relevant learning experiences optimize opportunities for all students to productively participate and lead in an increasingly diverse and dynamic society. There's a lot of words in there, but I think it encompasses our ambitious goal. And we started this work approximately 8.5 years ago when I joined the foundation to create the division that we refer to as Lucas Education Research. Next slide, please. So in that time, we have spent the last 8.5 years understanding and studying project-based learning. As many of you know, it's an approach that entails a great degree of collaboration for individual and group-worthy projects as students attend to authentic and relevant real-world problems. Next slide, please. Our theory of action as we developed our plan was to work on understanding the key design principles of high quality project-based learning that could provide good examples for teachers who are interested in better understanding what such an approach looks like in curriculum materials, and to align those materials to high quality professional learning experiences. Once we had a good understanding of those key design principles and what the high quality professional learning looks like, we then attended to what we refer to as design-based research, working alongside schools and teachers to improve and iterate on our approach. before we would then take it to a more rigorous research trial. All the while understanding that the blueprint is necessary for this approach and this practice to be somewhat consistent across these sites for the purposes of research, but with great appreciation for the variation that is necessary to engage students, to celebrate their backgrounds, and to ensure that the content is appropriate for the specific location of each of these sites. Next slide, please. So what we came to was a set of 4 large domains that we describe high quality project-based learning with. First and foremost is this idea of purposeful and authentic experiences. This is the idea that if students can see a purpose for learning beyond the 4 walls of school, they will develop greater agency and ownership over their learning. They will feel it is meaningful and consequential. And oftentimes we see that this engages even more students than we would in a traditional practice. In the second area, we talk about deep integration with course content. So here what we're talking about is this idea that as we build our projects and we think about our driving questions, we attend very carefully to the disciplinary practices. This is never to look like what people often refer to as chasing butterflies in the backyard versus deep integration of disciplinary skills. So we work towards integration of all of those skills within the projects. That is the purpose of the project. And then thirdly, as I mentioned earlier, this is equal parts high quality curriculum as it is teaching practice. That we know oftentimes people refer to project-based learning as no more sage on the stage, but rather guide on the side. And I think what we want to emphasize is that this facilitation role is critical to high quality project-based learning, that relationships matter, and that the culture and the climate of the classroom carry equal weight, as do the high quality materials. And then lastly, this is a large tent of practice under this idea of project-based learning. This does not mean that everything that a teacher has in the toolbox goes away and this is the new kind of flavor du jour. Rather, it means bring all of your best practices to this tent. And many of those are described in our papers. Next slide, please. So we conducted a large scale set of studies across 4 grade levels and subject areas. And what we found with these randomized control trials was that students in the project-based learning classrooms across large urban and rural school districts significantly outperform their peers in more typical classrooms. In addition, we found that the students across racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic backgrounds benefit from project-based learning. Next slide, please. As I mentioned in our vision, equity is at the center of our work. This is where we see many of our commonalities between high quality project-based learning and competency-based education. We know that our students need meaningful and authentic experiences, and that student engagement and agency are critical to high quality learning experiences. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to you, Elliot.
Great, thank you, Kristen, for that overview and launching our conversation today. And the studies that Kristen was mentioning at the end there are just really impressive. And I strongly encourage you to read them or review our last webinar that focused on them in depth. Thanks, Kristen. And next, I'd like to turn it over to our panel, which will be moderated by Christy Kingham. Someone is unmuted, if you could mute. It will be moderated by Christy Kingham, the Director of Leadership and School Design at Springpoint, and our panelists from Building 21. Brianna Alla is an 11th grade student at Building 21 Allentown. Telsa Communal, so if someone could mute, that would be great. Telsa Communal is the Assistant School Leader at Building 21 Allentown. Heather Harlan is a founding teacher at Building 21 Allentown. And Eris Sanders is the Director of Lab Schools for the Building 21 Network. And we're really excited to learn from all of you. And Christy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Elliot. You can, great, there it is. Hi folks, it's just so wonderful to be here. I'm actually in Maine. I just finished a school visit. I'm originally in New York usually, but it's nice to be here with you all from my hotel room. And I just wanted to thank you for being here and taking the time to learn about and think about the connection between CBE and PBL. And so my role is to help facilitate the conversation from the folks with Building 21, who I have had the pleasure with learning from and with for many years now, as folks who we're doing the same kind of work over the years. So that's how I ended up in this role today. And as Elliot shared, I'm Christy, and I'm the Director of Leadership and School Design at Spring Point. And Elliot shared a bit about our organization. We partner with schools, districts, and charters to create and support innovative school models that are designed for and responsive to the communities they serve. And just like we were just saying, equity is at the center for us as well. So just a bit of history prior to joining Spring Point almost 3 years ago now. I was a teacher and instructional coach for 15 years. And I had the honor of spending 8 of those years at a New York City school, the Young Women's Leadership School of Astoria. You can advance the slide, thank you. So at Twills of Astoria, I was part of the team of teacher leaders that designed a school-wide competency system. And I learned a ton by implementing the system as we were designing it as a teacher myself. And the goal for us at Twills, as we call it, was to design the most transparent and transferable system of communicating about student growth and progress that we could. And ultimately, we wanted students to own their own learning, to be able to say clearly and consistently what skills they were working on, instead of being told how they ranked on a traditional grading scale. So this came along with a whole host of systems and rubrics and implementation moves that I will not dive into the details on right now. That's a whole other webinar that we could also share the link to. But what happened for us at Twills was that once we had our competency system and a common language around assessment, we realized sort of in the opposite way that the Lucas folks did, that the more traditional learning experiences we were designing for students were really not adequately supporting them in developing agency, and they weren't really applying those really robust skills to other multiple varied contexts, and including probably most importantly to their lives. So we dove into the process to learn about and then implement PBL as our instructional model to complement the CBE system that we already had. And so once that happened, we were able to individualize student support and progress and connect the skills to the curriculum and the outside world much more effectively. You can move to the next slide, thank you. So when I joined Spring Point, the team here was already deeply working on and thinking about the connection between PBL and CBE. And I had a chance to pull back with them and think about what worked at the school I had just come from, and other successful schools that implement these practices. And while we're not going to talk about this today, there's just another essential lever to make deep work with CBE and PBL possible, and that's strong relationships. And academic support coupled with relationships that's cultivated by student supports like an advisory system or a primary person model. And so even though we're not talking about that third lever, I think you're gonna hear about it through what we hear from the Building 21 folks, and just know that that is another piece that makes this work. So speaking of, we have the pleasure today of being joined by the team at Building 21. And we'll engage in a panel discussion around both what CBE and PBL look and feel like when done well, but also the mindset shifts that are needed to deeply support this work. So with that, I'll pass it on to Eris to introduce you to the Building 21 model.
Thank you so much. So thank you guys for having me. We are super duper excited to be here, and it's so exciting to see so many folks from around the country who's here to to listen and to learn more about the things that we're doing at Building 21 and just the work around PBL and CBE in general. So I'm gonna just talk a little bit about our motto. And as I go through it, I want you guys to think about the why, the what, and the how. And so I think it's important before jumping in just to understand like why we're doing what we're trying to do at Building 21. And so one of the things that was really important to us is thinking about, you know, how do we make school work for students? Not how does students work for schools, but how do we make schools work for students? And in order to do that, something that was really important was that we had to think about education differently. We had to reimagine how do we create a space where we make sure that students are coming to a place where they're passionate and they can explore things that they really care about, and they really can make these big impacts on what they're doing relevant to today, what they want to do in the future, and how they can take this and make a large impact around them. And so that's pretty much the larger mission of why we're doing what we're doing at Building 21. And so the way in which we're able to do this is by pretty much personalizing the learning and taking innovation and rethinking traditional structures and systems and instruction so that we can make sure we're creating this type of environment for our students. And so at Building 21, we operate a competency-based model, and we do project-based learning through 2 of our lab schools, which are located in Philadelphia and Allentown. And we also work with school districts around the country and support them with implementing a competency-based and project-based learning model. You can go to the next slide. And so the next phase is how do we want to think about is the what we do. Okay, so the why is creating a space where our students can really explore what they're passionate about through these 3 types of learning, but the what we do is around the building blocks for Building 21. So as mentioned before, relationships is at the foundation of everything that we do. And to really do this model well, we have to make sure we're building really strong, authentic relationships with our students. And then we're using competency-based instruction and assessment so we can make sure students are learning the skills and the content and the things that they really need to be college and career ready. And also making sure that we're providing them with really strong, rigorous assessment to make sure that they're developing and mastering the skills that we believe that they need to master. And then in terms of project-based learning, we situate our model within projects and around solving real world problems where we're posing questions and our students are going through a process to really to investigate and to really figure out how do we solve these problems within this real world relevant learning opportunities, and then pulling in things that kids really care about, connecting them to potential jobs or partners or networks that's really going to help them explore the things that they care about. And then also individualizing the learning for students so that students are really tapping into what it is that they care about, but also tapping into things that they really need to really help to advance them on their personalized pathways. And so this is pretty much the key tenets or building blocks to what we do in terms of our CBE and project-based model. You can go to the next slide. And then the last part is pretty much the how. So when we talk about CBE and we talk about PBL and personalized learning and real world experiences, this is what the Building 21 studio design cycle looks like. So if a student is in one of our studios, they go through this process and they go through this process over and over and over again throughout their experiences at Building 21. So we start with something called the launch. And what the launch is it's really hooking students to whatever the problem or the material that they're going to be learning in their studio. We're trying to make sure students have the prior knowledge that they need, and we're introducing them to this real world authentic problem that we want them to explore throughout the project. Once students are really pulled in or hooked to the launch, they go through a cycle where they're investigating and going through a process of inquiry. They're constantly getting feedback to revise their work and really help to strengthen their skills. And then they're creating whatever that product is that we're trying to get them to do through the PBL model. So this cycle goes on. And in the end, at the end of the cycle, students are executing some real world authentic impact. And that could look like how a student may be making an impact in their smaller community. That can be students developing something where they make an impact on their outside communities or a larger context around them. But what we're really trying to do is make this experience for students connect to them, connect to what they're passionate about, and really help them dive into things that are real world and relevant so that they can leave and go out and make an impact. And at the end of this module, it's really important for our students to take a step back and reflect on what they learned. What did I do a good job at this? Did I not? How can I improve? What are the skill sets that I maybe didn't demonstrate throughout this project and I want to get better at next time? So not only is it pulling in the betterment of these academic pieces, we're also trying to get students to develop their own personal habits. And we're able to do that through this frequent feedback and reflection and building of skills. So I am going to now pass it back over. And that was just a little nudge into Building 21, but I look forward to talking more about our motto for the breakout groups as well.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited, and I cannot wait to hear from you again, Eris, and the other folks from Building 21 about what this looks and feels like, and the mindsets that you all have had to cultivate over the years in order to make it possible. So that was like a really big high level, here's what the model looks like at Building 21, and here is the philosophy. And so I think we want to take it first to open up the panel with Brianna, our student presenter, just to learn from you, how has your experience at Building 21 been different from your other school experiences?
My experience at Building 21 has been a lot different from other schools. It focuses more on me versus then grouping everyone together. I like that we're all individual people. We're not just all a group. And one thing I really like about Building 21 is advisory, because we're with the same people for 4 years. So that builds our relationships, as she was talking about, which is very important because that makes learning more fun for us, more interactive. And seeing the same people for 4 years is like growing a family, which is also very important. So I think it's a lot different because it focuses on me and builds relationships.
Thanks, Brianna. Yeah, we keep hearing about how important those relationships are, right? To tie all of that together that both myself and Eris were talking about. We'll come back to you, Brianna, because we want to hear more about your learning experiences in a little while. So thank you for kicking us off. And I'd like to open it up to Heather now. And Heather, let's go into the classroom with you. Could you share how a classroom implementing PBL and CBE, what it looks like and feels like in that kind of a classroom?
Sure. So hi, everyone. I'm Heather Harlan. I'm proud to be a founding teacher of Building 21 Allentown, and thank you all for being here with us today. So when you walk into a PBL CBE classroom, the first thing you need to realize is we're working from backward design, right? So the essential questions are clear, the culminating task is clear, and the competencies we're learning and the skills we're developing are very clear from the outset. And everything we do aligns to that. Eris talked about our studio cycle of launch, investigate, create, revise, impact, and then reflect. So you'll see that when you walk into a classroom. So launch time is, I'm launching a new studio next week. So we're going to be doing, tomorrow, we're going to be doing learning stations. We are doing scientific children's books. And my students today were like, what, science? Wait a second, this is English class. That's exactly what you'll see in a studio Building 21 Allentown in English, because we combine different courses together, an interdisciplinary approach. So as the studio goes on, students will start investigating and researching and finding out more, and that is very individualized. There's a lot of choice and voice involved, whether it be from the different texts or modifications that we need to make, or what competencies at this midpoint in the year, what skills do our students still need to demonstrate, or do they need enrichment on? Then we'll move into creation mode. You'll see a classroom in a workshop mode where everybody, like Eris said, is in a different place, and they're getting what they need within that process. There's ample time to revise. And then it's time to share. I teach year 1 students, so we start the year off in our classroom with very small sharing, like within the classroom, but now we're going to be reading our children's books to elementary school classrooms. And at the end of the year, we're going to be displaying art projects. So the impact grows as the year goes on. You'll see that happen. You will see culturally relevant materials, because it's about the skills, not the book. right? We don't teach Shakespeare, we teach reading critically. And so we have the ability to be very nimble and use and really prioritize culturally relevant curriculum in a PBL and a CBE classroom. And I really believe you'll see in a PBL CBE classroom a lot of equity when it comes to scoring and grading and assessing, because our students in our model can earn their credit through reaching a proficiency level or showing growth. And so that honors all different types of learning and helps students see their place within the work that we do together.
Thank you so much, Heather. And I think you, as a founding teacher of the school, it's so important for us to hear about what it looks like in your journey, and we're definitely want to hear more about that in a little bit. And I think I'd love to hear from you, Telsa. You came from a PBL school, so can you tell us about your journey joining the team at Building 21 from being just PBL to PBL aligned with CBE to help us understand the impact there?
Sure. So came to Building 21 same time Heather did. So we were founding teachers. So before moving into administration, I did get the opportunity to teach in the classroom. And so that transition for me was definitely a professional growth for me to go from to doing projects. My assessments really got a lot of time and attention because the competency work, as Heather was mentioning, provides opportunities for all students to access at different levels. So you really get to provide students with assessments that are at their level and then extending their level. So a really personalized approach to assessments. I also would echo what Heather said about cross-curricular opportunities. And so I think that competency work helps a teacher feel much more comfortable with delivering outside of your typical content area. So my first year, we got to do a cross-curricular project that was English, social studies, science, and math. And so to imagine working alongside those three content areas on a project is pretty spectacular, to be able to land that in a math classroom and just feel confident that I knew what was happening in the other three areas for content is really something that I think just pushed me professionally as a teacher to acquire the skills necessary to deliver assessment along CBE like that.
Telsa, I'm gonna keep you on the spot for just a minute. I have a follow-up question for you because you're sparking my thinking about the cross-cutting nature of competencies, right? So I think what you're saying is that you were doing a project with collaborating with folks from other subject areas, and like the through line was the competency. So could you just tell us a little bit more about that? Like, is there one competency you can give us to illustrate? I know your model, there's a bunch of competencies, but maybe if you could pick one that would help us understand how it can show up in all those places and then deepen the project work.
Sure. So the first one that will come to mind for me right away is expressing ideas, which is an English and ELA competency, but expressing ideas is very accessible for any teacher in any content area. I can easily reach out to my English. If I'm not comfortable, I could get the learning necessary from my fellow English teachers or at PD that we offer. But regardless, I would have a comfort like offering that assessment in my classroom and evaluating, assessing students using the indicators on the continua, because they're so detailed and provide feedback to the student right there and then using the continua. So expressing ideas is I'd say a more informal writing or product example where you can bring writing into your classroom. Reading critically right away triggers my mind that anyone can provide reading opportunities in your classroom. And so it's those two are, I could go on and on because it's really about anytime, anywhere when you're using competency-based education, but those are two that come to mind.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I know when I was doing this work at Tools of Astoria, as a teacher myself, it was really helpful for me to be able to norm. We had a common language, so I could really work with any other teacher in the school to look at student work, to understand where students were, and then to develop projects that incorporated their content areas or together. And And I thank you. I appreciate putting you on the spot with that one, but that made a lot of sense. So Brianna, I would love to return to you, just shifting gears a little bit. I want to get really specific to help us envision. We just heard about the classroom, what it looks like and feels like, but for you as a student, can you describe for us a specific project that you've worked on and really share with us, what is it about this learning experience that's like stuck in your mind? This is the one I want to share with you. Here's what we did and here's why it was so memorable.
In social studies, we did a project where we were advocating for other countries because of bad things that were happening in their country. I did the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is a country I never knew about. And I got to learn about it and I got to advocate for them. Which really stuck out is that I didn't like write an essay to the teacher or anything. We went into the cafeteria and we put up our poster boards and we were advocating directly to everybody. So they were more connected to us. And I had a petition, like a piece of paper for everyone to sign their names, had the computer up online for them to sign petitions so we could actually make an impact, which was one of the competencies, 1.4 social studies. So that was one project I was really proud of because I actually made an impact.
What did you learn about yourself as a learner from doing that project?
What I learned for myself is that I'm a very open-minded person. And I took the time to learn about a different country I never heard of, actually sympathize with the country and made other people care rather than just other people, because I cared about the country just as much as I wanted them to. So I learned that I can be very open-minded.
That's amazing. I'm feeling inspired by just hearing you talk about it. So thank you for doing that work and sharing it with us. I have one more question for you, still on the spot. Thank you. So now that we kind of have an idea of the project that you were doing and what that felt like, I heard a lot about feedback from your teachers. And I would just love to understand, like you just named a competency for us. You said, oh, it was this competency, the impact, right? So how do you know how you're doing on those competencies? Like what kind of feedback do you get? Do you get to reflect yourself? Just bring us into that world a little bit.
We have another competency where we have to reflect on it. And we had to fill out like a form about how many signatures we got, how did it make us feel? And lots of the teachers that came around to the table told us directly how they felt. And we had I'm not gonna say like a competition, but we just showed who got the most votes on the country, like who made the most impact. So that was one of the reflections. And then the signatures also showed reflection. And then the direct form showed. So yeah, that's how we reflect on our work, how we get feedback.
Thank you so much. It was really wonderful to hear about that project. And also panelists, I invite you, if you hear something from someone else on your team that you want to add on to, or just like ask back a question to, because I don't have all the context, you're welcome to do that too. And so Heather, just shifting back to you as a teacher, we've heard some like really inspiring, incredible ideas about the big system and then what it looks like, but I think like one of the keys for me, both in my role now and when I was at Tools of Astoria, was the mindset shift for the entire community. So I would love to hear from you. What were the biggest shifts you needed to make? And you can talk about mindset and implementation shifts, if that makes sense.
Sure. So after teaching for so long in a traditional school system, I had to let go of the mindset of every piece of paper was worth some points. Because in a competency-based, so in the way we do our school, we're competency-based completely. We don't have like a separate grade book for anything else. And so I had to figure out how to make some of the things I would do in a traditional school, because we all have to do certain things, count toward a competency-based system. And so part of it is when you have really good design and you're designing backward, it's all relevant. So the students start to see why it's relevant and they will push and they will ask, how many points is this worth? And you're saying, well, it works toward this. And if you can explain it and prove to it, they believe it and they understand it. And then sometimes you have to get creative. So I wanted to offer my students more opportunities for reading and for independent reading. That's a muscle that we really want to flex. The year one teachers here really value that. And so we created some reading logs and things that students could do a little bit more independently with a lot of choice. They can read whatever books they want, but it's still competency-based and helping them develop their skills and build their portfolios. So going from that traditional grading system to something that is very skill and competency focused was a big mindset shift for me and for a lot of other teachers who come here.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was a lot of what we had at our school too. And I think, you know, a mindset shift of the community as well really helped supporting families and understanding the work we were doing and inviting them in for exhibitions and having students own that. So we had students doing student-led conferences and talking about their work themselves versus talking about their work themselves. Sorry, I just noticed someone was like challenging me about saying the word work. So I think that was a really important push because it's student like in learning activities. So thank you, I appreciate that. So when students talk about their progress and their growth and show evidence of that in a student-led conference, that's another way that we're supporting them and owning the system and having that mindset shift as well. And the more practice that you have with that, the more fluent everyone becomes in the community. So speaking of mindset shifts and implementation, Eris and Telsa, I want to shift to you as school leaders. What is most essential for us to learn about supporting mindset shifts and implementation from your perspectives?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I had the opportunity to work at one of our lab schools for 4 years before transitioning into this role. And it was a learning experience, to say the least, a very honorable one, I would say, especially shifting mindsets from folks who've come from traditional educational settings to more PBL, CBE. But I would say one of the most important things that the leader has to do to pull this off is to make sure they're creating the time to do it. And when I say the time, you know, not just time from a scheduling perspective or not just time, a one-off professional development, but you need to think about time through every aspect of the innovation. And so how are you providing the time for ongoing professional development and training? How are you providing the time for support and coaching and pushing teachers to reflect and sitting with teachers when they cry and sitting with teachers to push them to take initiative or to take risks that's so hard for the work that we're trying to do? How are you creating time for teachers to collaborate and read and unpack competencies and normal student work and deep dive into questions and assessments? How are you creating time for folks to really reflect so that they can be, so it's not just time in the traditional sense, it's literally everything that you're doing to really impact the work they're trying to do so that you can have a really strong outcome. And so I think you have to be really creative about how you really put that into that little 7.5 possible hour block of time that you have your kids and teachers, but you have to be really thoughtful about that.
And I would agree with everything Eris said. And the two things that I would like to highlight to add to that is that you really have to celebrate your teachers' success, right? So your staff success. So I would say that there's some lagging indicators that occur from a competency-based model that you won't see right away. And so just knowing what it does look like to have engagement in the classroom and to celebrate the engagement. I will tell you, Ms. Harlan's classroom is one of the most beautiful places you'll ever step foot into because of her engagement and the common language that occurs in that classroom. If you walk in that classroom, the students are so excited to share with me the language of the competencies. And so when you see that and you recognize that, I tell Heather as much as I can, like, I can't wait to walk into your space every day. Like, it'll brighten my day, right? And so just sharing that with staff as they go through that process, that progress that they're making, transitioning. So really celebrating is important, I think. And then the time, the professional development time, collaboration time. We have collaboration time built into our schedule. That's really critical for support systems. As Eris was mentioning, the support systems.
Thank you both so much. And I now want to go visit that classroom as well. And I think that's one of the reasons why, for me personally, I continue to do this work, was because I know what it felt like to be a teacher in a classroom from 6th through 12th grade and as an instructional coach, and what it feels like when students are invested and engaged in their own learning, and not just because the project is really cool, but because they understand what they're working on and why, and what skills that they're getting really strong at and what they need to work on. And that is different than most school models, despite our best efforts, right? So it's just really exciting to hear you all talk about that. And I think the last piece on the panel, before we shift to think about the breakout rooms, is for each of you, and I'll call on you individually, but if you could just give us what advice do you have for schools and teachers starting out? And Brianna, for you, it's what advice do you have for students starting out in this, right? So I think I'll start with Eris, if you're okay with that. Thank you. Eris, what advice do you have?
Sure. So as a leader, I'm going to give you guys advice from a leader's perspective. I haven't been a student in a very long time. However, I am committed to learning. I think as a leader, you have to create the environment to allow this to thrive. So a lot of the work, and I know we talked about this before, is around the mindset work. And so we are truly shifting mindsets as we do this work, and you have to create an environment that allows for that process to happen. And so I think a lot of that just comes through the building of trust, the establishment of relationships, not just with students, but with your staff, with your families, because you want folks to really jump onto this and hold on to this and believe in this. And so we have to do all of that people work, for lack of better words, as we're doing this, and allow the space and the support for people to fall forward and to make mistakes and truly work through and iterate through this process. But in order for people to feel safe that they can do that, to really do this work, you have to have the environment established in order for that to happen, and provide folks with the support in order to take them through the process.
Thank you, Eris. Let's hear from Telsa.
I'd say that scaffolding your transition is very important. And so having a short-term plan, a long-term plan, and bringing all of your stakeholders along with that vision, communicating it, sharing, making sure that everyone knows their role, that is really important. That is the best piece of advice I can give.
Thank you so much. And Heather, what's your advice?
I would say definitely you have to use collaborative time and professional development time, partly to norm scoring on the competencies. Competencies, when used correctly, are a great tool for equity, and it takes practice, right? We all come to scoring and grading with biases. For me, it's the in conclusion, right? Or if you make me laugh, or fill my heart with your writing, I'm going to have a bias for it. The competencies really help us focus on the skills and help us push our biases away and see what's really on the paper, what's really on the project. And you need time together as a staff community to norm that out. Building 21 has established what I find to be a very effective protocol for norming as teams. And I think that's something that if you're looking into a CBE program, you have to make sure you allow time for norming.
Thank you, Heather. And last but certainly not least, Brianna, you are the most important voice on this panel, so I wanted to save the last word for you. What advice do you have for us?
Specifically for students, yeah, I could use this for teachers too. Just not to be afraid of change, because it is a lot to take in. And it took me like a good 2 weeks to fill out the system and stuff, feel it out and stuff. So I think you should just be open-minded about everything, because it's really gonna do you good. It's a very positive thing.
Thank you so much. That was really wonderful, and you all spoke so passionately. I can't wait to come visit now. Hopefully I'm able to come and see all the wonderful work, and we're gonna have a chance to share more in breakout rooms. So if folks stick around, and I'll pass it back to Elliot to wrap this up.
Great, and I love your final words, Brianna. Be open to change. And 2 weeks was remarkably fast. I'm impressed with how quickly you adjusted. to the new approach. And thank you so much to all of the panelists from Building 21 and to Christy for such great questions and facilitation. You all really provided a tremendous amount of inspiration and practical knowledge around the big shifts that are needed to move deeper into competency-based education and project-based learning. And there were also great questions in the chat and many excellent resources shared. So thank you everybody for that other conversation. And I know we didn't have the chance to answer everybody's questions in the depth that they need and deserve. And I did want to say that the breakout rooms will be an opportunity to actually have a discussion with our panelists. And now I'd like to turn it over to Rochelle Urban, Program Manager at Lucas Education Research, to offer some reflections and share a new resource on CBE and PBL. Thanks, Rochelle.
Thank you so much. And I also wanted to thank the panel for sharing all of your great experiences and insights, and especially the advice at the end, which is so helpful to hear. So thank you all for that. And for Christy, who brought in, from a different perspective, but echoed a lot of the things the Building 21 folks said. So, some of the things that I was hearing about how much the students are in the driver's seat of learning, the agency that they have in the classroom, really highlights the things that are important to both CBE and PBL. I heard, talk about how engaged students are, how interdisciplinary the work is, and how they're making connections to the real world. I especially loved, Brianna, when you shared kind of the found passion for a country you've never even heard of before embarking on your social studies project. And also in the advice that deep need for time and scaffolding to make it happen. So when we first discussed putting together the webinar, we thought that there's not really a resource that ties project-based learning and competency-based learning together. So as part of the preparation, we actually put together a paper that we're going to be sharing with you. And we looked at how the two different approaches are similar and different, but also how they look in practice. So a lot of what you heard from Building 21, and as part of building the piece, we talked to other schools as well who are doing the work. If you can bring up my slide, Kiara. So I don't have a lot of time today to share the paper, but I wanted to just give you a little bit of what's in there. And as we were looking at the similarities and the difference, a few key things really popped out. The first was that why question that Eris was talking about. Why do people get started doing project-based learning or competency-based or both? And the one, I'm showing you this graphic, which kind of sums this up. And the parts on the outside, those three phrases on the outside, are those values that are shared between competency-based and project-based learning that really bring people to the work. And that's the equity considerations, increasing student engagement and agency, and then giving students meaningful and authentic learning experiences. And in the center are all the ways that this looks the same in both project-based learning and competency-based education. You see there's lots and lots of things that overlap in the instruction and assessment and how the system support and what professional learning looks like. I'm not going to go over all of it, but what I want you to take away is that A, it looks very similar and there's lots of overlap. But what you don't see here is actually the differences. And I think the differences are where the title for today's webinar really pops up, which is Better Together, because these two have specific strengths that balance each other out. And those strengths really make it so that if your school, like Building 21, using both competency-based and project-based learning, you really are truly achieving that academic excellence and equity in education. The paper also provides a little bit of advice from the people we talked to, and it was echoed in a lot of what Building 21 offered today too, which is that time piece, really taking the time to develop the competency system that the school has, not trying to do it all at once, and allowing for some successes early on by starting the work. Another piece of advice was about the relationships and how important it is to have trust within the relationships. So I think a lot of that came out today, and we'll share the link in just a moment. It is a working draft. So one of the things we hope to do today is to actually solicit your feedback too. So when we share it, you'll see it has my email address. We invite any feedback you have, particularly if you are thinking about getting started and have questions that aren't really answered in the paper. I'd love to hear from you as well. So I will put that in as soon as I am done talking, and we'll share it as well in follow-ups from this work. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Elliot.
Great, thanks very much, Rochelle. And what a terrific resource. We're really looking forward to the draft and being able to comment or just learn from it and receive the final document when it's done. We also want to briefly share some resources for you to go deeper into this work. I know that we've heard so much today, and sometimes it's great to be able to revisit and go deeper on a particular topic that's your next step right now. So just wanted to mention, as you can see here, that Lucas Education Research website has extensive resources to support your work in project-based learning in particular, including research, videos, curriculum materials. And I wanted to say too, we're going to move through these resource slides quickly. I know you won't be able to capture it all, but you will be getting an email in the next day or two with a link to the slides and the video. Jessica, if you could put that link in for this website, that would be great. Thank you. And next slide, please. The Aurora website also has many resources to guide your work in competency-based education, including many reports and issue briefs. We have 2 blogs with articles about pretty much every aspect of competency-based education, reports to our site visits around the country, past webinars, sessions from our conferences. So we also welcome you to go to the Aurora website. And next slide, please. Great, and Building 21's website also has tremendous amount of resources to guide your CBE journey. Some of them are shown here. Sandra also placed many of the links into the chat during the session. And one of the best ways to jumpstart your work in CBE and PBL, and I saw people in the chat asking some questions like, how do we do varied pacing? How do we get that going logistically at a high school level? And a lot of work has been done on these questions. So one of the best ways to jumpstart your work is to start with some of the deep learning that's already available from schools and organizations that have been doing this work for a long time. And Building 21's website is also a great place to learn more. Could I have the next slide, please? In a couple of minutes, we hope you'll join us as we move into breakout rooms. Even if you're not available to stay for those, I hope you'll stay for a couple quick messages on the next 2 slides. One of our, oh no, but please go back for a second, thanks. One of our breakout room topics is more focused at the classroom level, and we'll be discussing what a CBE project looks like, how teachers can get started, and how students experience their learning. The other breakout room topic is more focused at the school and district level, and we'll be discussing ideas for shifting policy, how to implement at the school and district level, and ideas for outreach to the unconverted. We'll bring back this slide in a minute so you can choose your breakout room, but if you're not available to stay, and if I could have the next slide, we wanted to ask you to take a minute to complete our 3-question survey. It's very quick, and the link to the survey should be in the chat any second. Just want to pause while that gets in there. I'll keep going while that happens, but I can also paste it in. Thank you. There's the link to the survey. And If you're staying for the breakout rooms, feel free to just open the survey link now while it's here, but then complete it after the breakout rooms. And could I have the next slide, please? Great, and before we turn back to the breakout rooms, we just wanted to invite you to stay connected with us. Our names and email addresses are here. And again, if you don't have time to grab the ones you want, you'll get an email in the next day or two with links to these slides. We won't be coming back together after the breakout rooms. So before we transition to that part of the webinar, I just really wanted, again, to thank all of our presenters and the many people who worked behind the scenes today to make the webinar such a valuable opportunity for advancing our work in project-based learning and competency-based education, and really appreciate everybody who participated in the webinar, everyone who entered information in the chat, and your great questions and resources. And can I have the next slide, please? So again, transitioning to the breakout rooms, sorry, something weird just happened on my screen. These are the two breakout room topics. You can join whichever room you want, and the instructions for joining a breakout room are at the bottom of the screen here in orange. And here's how it works. An invitation to join one of the two breakout rooms is about to appear on your screen, and you just choose the breakout room that you'd like to enter. If that doesn't work, if that doesn't happen for you, the breakout room doesn't pop up or you can't enter, just stay in the main room and write in the chat which breakout room you want to enter, and we'll admit you. And I think that's all. So in just a second, we're going to put up the invitation for you to enter the breakout rooms, and we'll see you in there in a minute. Again, thanks so much to everybody for your participation in this first hour of the webinar. And Jessica, if you could open the breakout rooms, that would be great.